Foreign Policy, 19th of September 2023, The Reasons Europe Will Fight to De-risk from Crafty China. China has been financially courting the most powerful EU members as it plays the divide-and-conquer strategy. Who rejects all threats from China? In Brussels, buzzwords come and go. In the corridors of power throughout Europe in 2021, the idea of strategic autonomy was all the rage. It was intended, in theory, to symbolize more European autonomy in international affairs. However, many of its purported objectives in commerce, finance, and the economy were directed toward the US, not the least of which was shielding Europe from the consequences of US extraterritorial sanctions and tariffs. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the COVID-19 pandemic's exposing of supply chain risk have fundamentally changed Europe's economic approach. These days, de-risking is the buzzword that gets European officials' attention. Brussels is increasingly emulating Washington's efforts to lessen its reliance on China economically rather than attempting to defend itself against US economic policy. That being said, American plans are well ahead of those in Europe. This is partly because European perspectives on Beijing are generally less aggressive than those in Washington. However, Europe's sluggish de-risking process also underscores the reality that cutting economic connections to China will be far more difficult for Europe than for the US. I'll give you 5 reasons why. 1. The primary issue with Germany, not Europe, is its over-reliance on the contracting Chinese market. More than 3% of Germany's GDP is derived from exports of products and services to China, more than double the amount exported by France, Italy, and Spain, and the highest rate in the European Union. German companies are also well represented in China, where their yearly sales amount to an astounding 6% of Germany's GDP, over twice the average of the 6 largest economies in Europe. In particular, the automotive and chemical industries are highly vulnerable to China. Beijing can use this leverage to counter EU de-risking initiatives by, for example, boycotting German companies. The varying degrees of European dependency on China contribute to the diverse views on China. On the one hand, as seen by the recent trips to Beijing by French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Berlin and Paris are not opposed to deeper ties with China. However, most Eastern European nations have always been hostile toward China, and Beijing's covert backing of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has only made them more so. The EU is already fragmented, few topics bring Europeans together. Nevertheless, beginning de-risking without an agreement with China won't be easy. 2. Regarding de-risking, the EU is more affected than the US. Despite all the discussion about de-risking, Chinese companies continue to be the biggest providers of goods to Europe, making up almost 20% of imports in the first half of 2023. Contrarily, for the first time in almost 20 years, the United States trade with Mexico and Canada exceeded its trade with China during the same period. The change is noteworthy, even if part is due to Chinese commodities being diverted through third countries. For products needed for the ambitious energy transition undertaken by the group, Europe is mainly dependent on China. More than 4/5 of the EU's lithium-ion battery imports come from China, for example. The image of investments is considerably more dramatic. Chinese companies now have a significant presence in Europe's infrastructure, including ports, in at least 10 EU countries, power grids, mainly in Portugal, Italy, and Greece, and subsea telecommunication cables, like the Peace Cable linking Pakistan and France, thanks to extraordinarily high investment flows in the 2010s. The last 3 years have seen a decline in European Chinese investments as these companies concentrate on high-caliber initiatives, particularly in the clean technology sector. However, Chinese capital inflows are still strong, with $26 billion coming between 2020 and 2022, nearly nothing in the US. 3. Europe has a limited capacity to entice businesses to join. Governments can develop the best de-risking strategies, but private companies will always be responsible for carrying them out. Persuading European enterprises to reduce risks will prove to be a challenging task. Offering companies carrots in the shape of financial incentives or state investment programs would be one approach to persuade them to diversify away from China and move production to Europe. Nevertheless, most EU members have limited financial room for such measures. It's a long shot that the European Inflation Reduction Act will materialize and saturate American businesses with subsidies to restore production. In the absence of carrots, the alternative is to use sticks, such as penalizing companies with significant exposure to China by limiting export credit guarantees or cutting back on state subsidies. However, this would not be a wise decision. Penalizing EU companies for conducting excessive business with China would be a massive own goal, as it would erode Europe's economy and even persuade companies to quit the EU. Furthermore, these laws would probably be enforced at the member state level, leading to economic distortions throughout Europe and encouraging businesses to relocate to more accommodating EU member states. 4. It is impossible to expect the establishment of European supply chains for many essential items. American companies own the technology needed to produce cutting-edge semiconductors, which gives the country a significant advantage in relocating semiconductor supply chains domestically. Therefore, Europe will remain dependent on the United States in this area unless it creates its entire semiconductor supply chain, which is an impractical goal. Semiconductors might not be the ideal location to start if de-risking is about achieving European self-sufficiency in vital areas and concerning China. Imagining new European supply chains for other essential items outside the high-tech industry seems unrealistic. The EU also seeks to reduce risk in the crucial raw materials category, including a range of metals necessary for the energy transition. Brussels has set a goal to produce 10% and refine 50% of the essential raw resources it consumes annually by 2030. Companies that extract and process commodities know how environmentally damaging these activities are. Therefore, they don't think it's feasible to expand into Europe. Plans of that kind would face fierce public opposition.